Louisiana is a place where the air itself feels heavy with secrets. The swamps stretch for miles, and the roads cut through them like dark veins, winding between cypress trees draped in Spanish moss. On nights when the fog rises thick and pale, the world feels less like the present and more like a memory you should never have stumbled into. Travelers sometimes speak of a building that appears out of nowhere at the edge of the swamp road. An old wooden chapel, leaning slightly to one side, as if the swamp is slowly trying to swallow it whole. The locals call it the church that never opens. From the distance, it looks like a ruin. Its white paint has peeled away, leaving only gray wood behind. The windows are narrow, almost like slits in a prison wall, and the front doors, massive iron-handled, are always shut tight. No one alive remembers seeing them open. And yet, every night, without fail, the sound of an organ rises from within. Deep notes roll across the swamp, echoing against the water, carried by the mist. Sometimes, voices join it. A choir, solemn and slow, singing words no one can understand. People in the nearby town don't like to talk about it. Ask too many questions and you'll get the same answer. Don't go near the chapel after dark. Old Miss Hattie, who runs the gas station on the edge of town, says she once saw a man standing by the church gate. He had been drinking, laughing, boasting that he'd knock on the chapel door just to prove the story's wrong. But when she looked away, just for a second, the man was gone. All that remained was his hat. Resting on the damp grass, she swears she heard footsteps fading into the mist, and then, faintly, the choir began to sing louder, as though welcoming a new voice. Most people laugh off her story, but if you watch closely, you'll notice they avoid that stretch of road at night. They'd rather drive 20 extra miles through the backwoods than risk hearing the music bleed out from the swamp. One autumn night, a young traveler named Claire was driving south through Louisiana. She wasn't from here. Her accent gave her away, and her license plates weren't local. She had taken the wrong turn somewhere and ended up on a narrow road swallowed by fog. Her headlights caught the outline of something looming by the water. At first, she thought it was an abandoned barn, but as she slowed down, the shape of the chapel revealed itself. The cross at the top was crooked, tilting like a warning finger pointing at the sky. And then she heard it. A single organ note, long and trembling, leaking from behind those locked doors. Claire froze. The sound was beautiful, almost too beautiful, like music made not by hands, but by the swamp itself. It filled the night air until she felt her chest tighten, her breath falling into rhythm with the melody. She should have driven on. She should have pressed the gas and left that road behind. Stepping out of her car, Claire felt the ground sink beneath her boots. The air was thick, every breath tasting of stagnant water and rot. Yet the music, it was intoxicating. It seemed to guide her, pulling her closer to the chapel steps. That's when she noticed them. Shapes in the fog. At first, she thought it was just the mist playing tricks on her eyes. But the longer she stared, the clearer they became. Figures, faint and wavering, standing just beyond the tree line. They weren't moving. They weren't speaking. They were waiting. Claire felt every instinct screaming at her to leave. But something else, something deeper, kept her rooted in place. The organ swelled. Voices rose in harmony, smooth and solemn, like a prayer sung for the dead. And as the choir grew louder, the silhouettes turned their heads toward her. dozens of shadowy faces, staring as one. Claire stumbled back, heart racing. She remembered something she'd overheard at a diner earlier that day. Two old men whispering over coffee. The church doesn't take you all at once. It waits until you're curious. That's how it begins. The legend says the congregation inside isn't made of the living. They are the lost, the broken, the desperate. People who once came to the chapel seeking salvation, only to become part of the eternal choir. Their souls bound to the hymn forever. And the door? The reason it never opens? Some say it doesn't need to. The music is the invitation. Stand there long enough, and you'll hear it in your own mind. Louder and louder, until it drowns out everything else. Claire's hands trembled as she reached for her car door. She told herself she'd imagined it all. Just the fog, the swamp, the night playing tricks. But when she looked back one last time, the figures hadn't faded. They were closer now, forming a silent congregation in the mist. And in that moment, she realized something terrible. The choir wasn't singing to God. They were singing to her. Claire didn't sleep that night. Even after she made it back to a roadside motel miles away, the music followed her. Not out loud, not in the air, but in her mind. The sound of the organ replayed itself with every heartbeat. Whenever she closed her eyes, she saw the silhouettes waiting in the fog, their heads all turning in unison. By morning, she was pale, her hands trembling as she held her coffee. The motel clerk noticed. He leaned on the counter, giving her a long, cautious look. "You drove the swamp road, didn't you?" he asked quietly. Claire froze. She hadn't mentioned it to anyone. The clerk shook his head. "You shouldn't have stopped. Folks who linger there, they don't come back the same." Later that day, Claire found herself in a small diner on the edge of town. Old men played cards in the corner, and the ceiling fan creaked with every slow rotation. She overheard a conversation, two locals speaking in hushed tones. "They built that chapel back in the late 1800s, one man said, never lifting his eyes from his cards. "But the preacher who raised it, he wasn't right. Claimed he could hear the voice of God through the swamp. Said the fog carried messages meant only for him." The second man leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "They say he called his flock to worship one night. Folks went in, but nobody ever came back out. The doors shut, and by morning, the place was empty. Or maybe not empty, depending on who you ask." Claire's stomach tightened. The men kept playing cards as though the story meant nothing. But she could tell by the way their eyes flicked to the window, as if expecting to see the mist rolling in, that the fear was still alive. That evening, Claire told herself she couldn't go back. She told herself she was smarter than that, stronger than that. But when the sun dipped low and the air grew heavy, she found her car rolling down the same winding road. The swamp greeted her with silence. Even the frogs and insects seemed muted, as though the entire world was holding its breath. And there it was again, the chapel, standing crooked and forgotten, yet unbroken by time. Its doors gleamed faintly in the moonlight, iron handles black with rust. The music began the moment she stepped out of the car, a single organ note rising from the cracks of the wooden boards, swelling into something that seemed alive. Her skin prickled, her pulse sinking to the rhythm. This time, she didn't just hear the choir. She heard words, whispered phrases in a language she didn't know, but somehow understood. Pleas, promises, warnings, and she wasn't alone. The silhouettes returned, At first, scattered through the mist, then closer, gathering in numbers. Their forms were vague, stretched and blurred by the fog, but their presence was undeniable. Claire whispered, "What do you want from me?" No voice answered, but the organ played louder, and the choir swelled in harmony. The figures tilted their heads, all at once, like puppets moved by invisible strings. One shape broke away from the rest. Taller, closer, clearer. She could almost see a face, hollow eyes, a mouth frozen mid-hymn. It raised a hand, not to wave, but to beckon. Claire stumbled back. The figures didn't follow. They didn't need to. The music pulled her forward, step by step, toward the locked door. Her hand hovered over the iron handle. Cold mist clung to her fingers, biting her skin. She expected it to be sealed, as it always was in the stories. But something made her hesitate. Not the thought that it wouldn't open, but the terrible suspicion that this time it might. She pressed her palm against the wood. The vibrations of the organ thrummed through it, like a heartbeat. For a moment, she thought she felt the door pulse back, alive, breathing. Her breath caught in her throat. Behind her, the choir stopped. The silence was worse than the music. Empty, absolute. And then, faintly, from inside the chapel, a voice whispered her name. Claire. The whisper of her name froze Claire where she stood. The air pressed heavy on her chest, thick with the dampness of the swamp. Behind her, the fog hung motionless, as if even the night itself was waiting. Claire. The voice came again, softer now, as though spoken from the other side of a wall, or from under the ground. Her hand dropped from the iron handle. She stumbled back, shaking her head, whispering to herself that it wasn't real. But the silence around her was unbearable. She found herself desperate to hear the music again, to break that emptiness, and that realization terrified her even more. The next morning, Claire sought out answers. In the town library, the air smelled of mold and dust. She found an old historian, a man who sat among stacks of parish records and weathered maps. He looked up at her with weary eyes. "You've seen it, haven't you? The chapel." She nodded. He closed the book in front of him. That church was never meant for worship. Not really. The preacher who built it, Ezekiel Morrow, claimed he was called by God to raise a house of light in the swamp. But Ezekiel was no man of God. He was a man of obsession. He believed music could open a path between worlds. Claire frowned. A path? The historian leaned closer. The organ was built from cypress wood that grew in a drowned graveyard. He had the pipes forged from bells stolen out of burned churches. He wanted sound that could wake the dead, and he got it. His voice dropped to a whisper. The congregation never left, not in life, not in death. They sing still, bound to his hymn. And now you've heard it too. Once the music finds you, it doesn't let go. Claire left shaken. By nightfall, her resolve had cracked again. She found herself back on the swamp road, headlights cutting through mist that seemed to move like smoke. This time, she didn't even remember turning down that way. Her hands had simply steered the wheel, as though guided by something stronger than thought. The chapel loomed ahead, darker than before. Its roof sagged, its boards swollen with years of rot, but the cross at the top gleamed faintly in the moonlight. She stepped out of her car, her chest rising and falling too fast. And then the music began, not from the chapel, but from within her. The organ's notes thrummed in her chest cavity, each chord vibrating in her ribs. The choir's voices whispered behind her eyes. She dropped to her knees, clutching her head, gasping as the hymn filled her veins. The fog thickened. Silhouettes gathered. But this time, they were not just standing. They were moving. The shapes drew closer. Claire's vision blurred, her breath sharp and shallow. When she blinked, she saw faces, clear for only a second before dissolving into mist again. A woman with hollow eyes and lips parted mid-song. A boy with water dripping down his chin, eyes wide as if forever caught in surprise. An old man, his mouth twisted in a hymn that never ended. They surrounded her in silence, waiting. Claire whispered, "What do you want from me?" And though no mouth moved, she felt the answer inside her head, carried on the organ's hum. Sing. She staggered back toward the chapel steps. The door loomed before her, massive and unyielding. She pressed her hands to her ears, but it didn't matter. The song was inside her now, building, climbing toward a crescendo. The historian's words echoed in her memory. Once the music finds you, it doesn't let go. Her body swayed with the rhythm. Her lips parted without her willing it, and a note slipped free, low, trembling, but in perfect harmony with the choir. The silhouettes leaned forward, as though acknowledging her. The fog shivered. The chapel doors pulsed with the sound, wood bending inward like lungs drawing breath. And Claire realized the terrible truth. The church wasn't waiting for her to go inside. It was waiting for her to join the song. Claire's voice trembled as it slipped from her throat, blending seamlessly with the choir. The sound shocked her, haunting, mournful, but not her own. It was as though someone else was singing through her. Her knees buckled. She pressed her hands against the chapel door, feeling it thrum beneath her palms, alive, vibrating with the hymn. Every note pulled at her, tugging her deeper, binding her lungs and tongue to the melody. She tried to scream, but it came out as another verse. The silhouettes and the fog swayed gently, like a congregation in prayer. Their hollow eyes gleamed faintly, fixed on her, and in that moment she understood. She wasn't an outsider anymore. She was already part of it. The mist thickened, swirling, and out of it a figure stepped forward. Taller than the rest, his shape was sharper, his presence heavier. He wore a long coat that trailed into the fog, and his face was nothing but shadow, save for two gleaming eyes. Claire's throat closed as his gaze fixed on her. Ezekiel Morrow, the preacher who had built this chapel, who had bound his congregation to the eternal hymn. He didn't speak aloud. His voice rang inside her skull. Deep as the organ itself, the song is never finished. Each voice completes it. Each soul carries it forward. You were chosen to hear it. You cannot turn away now. Claire shook her head violently. "I'm not yours!" But the choir rose behind him, swelling in a harmony so powerful it bent the air itself. Her denial drowned, swept away in the tide of voices. The chapel door shifted beneath her touch. It expanded with a deep groan, as though inhaling. Cracks spiderwebbed across the wood, glowing faintly with pale light. The iron handles rattled, not from her hands, but from within. It wasn't a door. Not anymore. It was a mouth. A living thing, waiting to devour the sound. The hymn surged toward its climax. The swamp itself seemed to sing. The trees trembling, the water rippling, the fog pulsing with rhythm. Claire clamped her hands over her ears, but the song roared inside her skull. She stumbled back, gasping, her voice breaking free again. This time louder, stronger, carried against her will. The sound no longer belonged to her. It belonged to the choir. The silhouettes moved closer, closing in from every side. Claire's heartbeat thundered against the music, frantic, desperate. "Stop!" she cried. But the word dissolved into another note, another verse. Her voice wasn't her own anymore. It was theirs. The preacher raised his arm, and the silhouettes froze. His shadowed face turned toward the chapel door. It opened. Just a crack. Just enough for a pale light to spill through, blinding and cold. Within that light, Claire saw movement. Rows upon rows of faces, pale and hollow, mouths open wide in endless song. Eyes rolled back, hands clutched to their chests as if in prayer. The eternal congregation. And in the center, the organ. Towering, monstrous, pipes stretching into shadows that had no end. It pulsed like a heart, its keys moving without touch. The preacher's voice thundered in her skull. "Step inside. The hymn is waiting." Claire's body leaned forward, every nerve screaming in protest as her legs moved on their own. The fog wrapped around her ankles, tugging gently like guiding hands. The door yawned wider, the light swallowing her sight. She fought with everything inside her, her will, her breath, her name. She thought of the road, the motel, the world outside this swamp. She thought of silence, of freedom. And for one fleeting second, she broke free. The song cracked, her voice faltered, and she stumbled backward, clutching her throat. The preacher's shadow loomed larger. The door groaned, hungry, closing once more. The silhouettes in the fog tilted their heads, watching. The organ's final note lingered, long and trembling, fading into the night. When Claire blinked, she was standing by her car, headlights still on, the swamp silent. The chapel was gone. Only the mist remained. Her chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. Relief washed over her, until she opened her mouth to scream. And what came out wasn't a scream. It was a hymn.